We have the first up, today's Politico Management headline, Boomers and Millennials. How do we avoid pitting the young against the old? And I'd like all of you to address that. I guess Teresa was the most vigorous in her acknowledgement of the question, so why don't you start?
I wrote a paper with that title and said we are not reptiles, that humans don't eat their young.
Good start.
So I'm going to speak very broadly. That I've looked at 176 countries, and I've looked at the United States, and I've looked to see if countries provide pensions and increase their pension bill, do they take money away from programs that help the young, and expecting if the old do eat the young, that there's a trade-off. And it turns out that countries that fund pensions also provide a huge amount of money for the young in terms of education spending. It also turns out in the United States, the time that we've spent the most for education and healthcare for the young is precisely the time in which we've actually increased and improved pensions, especially for older women. So it looks like a system that designs programs to help the most vulnerable, those who are elderly and those who are young, is a system that provides it for both, and that there's no trade-off. If we take pensions away from older workers, there's absolutely no evidence that that goes to the young. Now, right back to the pension design. We need pension design that helps the young, the students, have the best teachers in the classroom. And it's my conclusion that this pension design does the best for that goal.
I'd say a couple things here. First is that if you think back to my chart that shows the wealth accrual, the only way you get to that peak at the back end is because you're letting everyone else subsidize that peak. So we're absolutely letting short and medium-term workers subsidize the pensions and retirement of people who stay longer. So there's no question about that. Plans acknowledge this. It's quite clear on that. Moreover, we're also doing it in terms of generations. So I talked earlier about how plans have shifted over time. The plans for new teachers today are worse than teachers who entered 5 years ago, who entered 10 years ago. And what we've done is create new tiers in every state that are less generous for new teachers. And so New York has 6 different tiers. Tier 6 is for new teachers. It's worse than Tier 5. Tier 5 is worse than Tier 4. Tier 4 is worse than Tier 3, and so on down the line. So in order to fund these plans, in order to keep them solvent, we keep creating less generous, worse plans for new teachers. And so we're absolutely creating a shift across generations.
So go ahead, David.
No.
So Teresa said we should stop that, and I agree. And there's something that we should point out here, too, is that part of the reason that plans are less secure is there's a coordinated attack on public pension plans funded by people like John Arnold. So for folks who are funded by John Arnold to say, isn't that a bad thing? I mean, the analogy I would draw is, would you call someone to fix your garage after they just rammed their car into it? Right? This is too smart by a half. Folks who are designing a tax on retirement saying, isn't it terrible that retirement is less secure when they're behind it? What I would say, Jessica, to answer your question, is we should reject false choices and remind young people that we live in the wealthiest country in the history of humankind. And, it's actually timely that the Keystone Institute put out a report today that found if we tax the top 1% of earners at the same rate as the middle fifth of taxpayers, we would generate about $68 billion a year in additional revenue. $68 billion a year, while taxing the top fifth at the same rates as the middle fifth would generate about $128 billion a year. What we haven't talked about yet is the tax giveaways in places like Chicago under Mayor Emanuel that have put the system at risk and further the vicious cycle of not paying in. We live in a wealthy country. We can afford to have both a good public school system and a secure retirement. It shouldn't be either or.
David?
This idea of old folks and millennials is just cheap journalism. You can make this argument all throughout history. Guess what? People who are prudent and work hard prosper, and the system is not holding back young people, except I believe in one very, very significant area, which is turning higher education, which was free when I went to college, and turning the job market in ways that redistribute upward to the very wealthiest people in America. And it goes to this larger problem we have that I've written whole books about, that we have a massive socialist redistribution system that takes from the many to give to the very, very few. And government publishes zero statistics about it. And Chad makes a very good point about how the accrual works if you look at a pension plan that way. I don't think that's quite the right way to look at it, but there is a simple reform which would address this issue. Since we should be funding a pension plan each pay period, just as we fund people's actual pockets, once you leave a plan, the money is supposed to have been put into the plan on your behalf, and if you leave, say, at 40 for another job and you don't collect till you're 65, for 25 years, the capital in your plan contributed on your behalf is subsidizing other workers. There's a real simple solution to that, at least technically, and that is simply require that when you leave, the benefits are inflation adjusted. And then the only subsidy is any earnings above inflation, but you're kept even. Now, the effect that would have on this very important issue of how to retain and get workers to leave is going to complicate that. And one thing about defined benefit versus defined contribution plans is that if you're in a defined benefit plan that is a 1% plan, as many of them are, if you stay one more year, instead of getting 20% of your average final pay, you're going to get 21%. But if you are in a defined contribution plan, it means instead of living 20 years, you're going to live 19, and you will therefore be better off, plus you'll have one more year's contribution at a high level. And so it is easier to push people out the door when you have a well-defined defined benefit plan than when you have a defined contribution plan which encourages healthy people to hang on and continue working, particularly now that we have rules that in your 70s and 80s you can continue to contribute to that plan.
Great. So thanks for all of you for that question. I now have a question. My guess is that it comes from an Illinois teacher, but reflective maybe of the audience. The question is, why shouldn't workers prefer defined contribution plans? Because with defined benefit plans, you depend on the employer to keep their promise. What, in addition to the sort of the premise of this question that we can't trust the employers to keep their promise, which defined benefits require that, could you also expand on this? David, you just gave us a great example of a kind of a regulatory or a policy fix.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a real simple issue. You know, the teachers' organizations, whether they're the AFT or any other group, and other public employee organizations should be policing these plans. And if the money is not deposited in the plan in a timely fashion, they should be raising hell about it. This is theft, plain and simple theft. If you don't make the contribution, I hate that word, but if you don't put the money into the plan, you're stealing from the workers' paychecks. And if people found their paycheck short one week, there would be all sorts of trouble. One of the reforms that I have written about is that there should be a disclosure on your paycheck every time of what was put into the plan that was deferred from your wages, so that you know it's a separate item. It's not complicated. It's a one-time setup charge to do it, and then you just have to track the contribution. Again, using that word I hate.
Okay, we're going to come up with it. We have a lot of really smart people in the room. Before you leave, I want you to provide David with substitute language for contribution.
Oh,
Okay.
I've got the
you
substitute
got it?
language. I just,
What is it?
well, it's deferred wages.
Deferred wages.
Yeah.
Everybody got that? Take a vow. You will not
pay.
leave
It's
this room
compensation. It's
ever.
pay.
It's pay. Okay. Chad?
So Illinois is a very extreme example of what I was talking about earlier. So Illinois, because they're in such bad financial shape, they have created a new tier. So they have Tier 2 and Tier 1. As of 2011, that Tier 2, all new workers are put into Tier 2. It actually has a negative accrual rate for teachers. If you start at 25, you don't have a pension worth more than what you've put in, your employers have put in, until you're 51. So you have to stay 26 years in order to have something worth more than your own contributions. It also has caps so that you can't get a pension after a certain level, and the caps are not inflation adjusted, And over time, they're worried that Tier 2 will actually be less than what Social Security uses as a minimum floor. So they're going to have to go back and revisit it. And they've done all this because they're broke. And they've done it. So Illinois is an extreme example. Every state is doing this to a certain extent in terms of adopting new or less generous plans for teachers that are requiring them to stay longer in order to get positive accrual. I think that all teachers deserve a secure retirement, no matter how long they stay in the profession. We should put them on a path of secure retirement plan. And plans like Tier 2 in Illinois are not doing that. They're not getting, in Tier 2, they don't get any of the employer contribution. They get less than their own contribution, actually. The plans charge them a fee to take out their own contributions, and they get zero interest. They also don't have Social Security. So you could be a teacher in Illinois, work for up to 9 years, and leave with less, like no employer contribution, less than your own contributions, and no Social Security.
And just, I can't, what Chad has just described is a perfect example of the many, many systems we
was gonna
have
say.
that take from the many to give to the few. And this is in a state that is allowing a number of major corporations, including Ford, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Continental Tire, Google's Motorola, and Sears, to keep the state income taxes withheld from their workers' paychecks. They never go to the government. They are kept by the companies. So this is a system to steal from these teachers and subsidize the state so that it can continue the massive corporate welfare that's going on in that state that should not exist.
Chad has steering us to a pretty good reform agenda, and that is not only, as David said, to change the design so that these promises are funded. Georgia has a constitutional amendment now that says that defined benefit plans should be funded, the ARC should be funded. And Chad's just told us that in order to retain and recruit teachers in Illinois, because they're going to have a hard time with Tier 2, is to actually fund Tier 2, improve that plan so that the rate of return increases. So fund the pensions we have, beef up those tiers, and then David and Dan has told us where we can get the money. So stop the corporate welfare, align the tax system correctly, and improve the defined benefit systems that we do have in the state. So thanks for that.
Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
No, just amen.
Can I make one point about retention, actually? So we talked about how these plans could, in theory, encourage retention rates. But if you look at plan assumptions, they don't assume that plans retain workers in their early years. So plans have vesting period for when teachers actually qualify for a pension, but there's no incentive there. The plans do not assume that it has any retention incentive at that key point in time. If you look at research on when the retention incentive kicks in, it doesn't kick in until teachers are reaching that back-end point. So at that point, they start to know and they start to react differently based on they know that that peak is coming for them, and they do wait longer for that. But then it pushes them out too. So there's a very small point in time where there's a retention incentive, but for the rest of the workforce, for the vast majority of teachers, pensions are not a retirement incentive. What they are is a retirement path for people to have retirement savings. We should be thinking about how to get everyone on a secure retirement path and not use the retirement structure as a retention incentive. We should be thinking about other ways to retain the workforce in terms of salaries, working conditions. If you talk to young teachers, they don't say they're leaving because of the retirement plan. They say they're leaving because they don't like working there, their benefits are low, or they don't like working with their colleagues or their principals. It's not about retirement incentive. We should separate those two conversations because the current plan is not working as a retention incentive, and it probably shouldn't.
So Teresa, do you want to?
Yeah, just,
Comment on that?
that's right. Teachers that you want to keep are leaving for other reasons, pay, lack of support by their principals, and actually the working conditions, the classroom. But Chad, pensions and all the other incentives, they're not substitutes. They're all complements. So the package of pay has to work together for retention and for the right incentives to leave. And there's a lot of improvement in the defined benefit system that can help complement those other proposals. But it's my conclusion that the defined benefit system is a really good skeleton and backbone for this labor market.
So I would like to switch to our higher ed colleagues. I have a question that combines both for teachers in K-12 and also higher ed. Would teachers benefit if they could be included in an expanded TIAA-CREF like pension plan?
I'm a huge fan of TICREF. I'm in it. But it also is a good hybrid for our system. It's perfectly portable, and we can't take money out before we retire. What a concept for a retirement plan. And much of our money is handled in a pooled, professional way. That the self-direction is very limited. What AFT and other unions have supported is a TICREF type model for private sector workers. In the 20 states mentioned, the goal is for all states, all private sector workers, to be able to have a place to safely and securely invest their money and have it there when it's time to take it out as an annuity. The other thing that TICREF does is that it actually provides a powerful voice to keep fees low.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is the comparison between TIA, CREF, and current state pension plans. Current state pension plans lock a worker into working for the public sector in that state. TIA CREF lets someone have portability across state lines. It has low fees. It is a national model. And so it has a lot of benefits that we could think about for the teacher workforce or other public sector workers.
But there's no reason a public sector plan couldn't be portable as well. I mean, one thing people forget is in the private sector, in construction, in entertainment, in transportation, we have portable defined benefit plans that work well and that support a high road workforce. And I just want to underscore something David said at the beginning, that sort of, I think the work in the private sector is a starting point. But at the end of the day, a 401k plan is a supplement, not a substitute for a pension, for a real retirement plan.
There's a lot of good things to be said for TIACREF, not the least of which is that its precursor, which was the private pensions of Mr. Carnegie, are the reason, probably the most significant single reason that America has the best research universities in the world, because he recognized that many, many smart men would, and back then it was almost all men, would not go into the academy because they had no way to sustain themselves in old age. And the model led to what today is TIACREF. But Dan is exactly right. There's no reason that we can't have the system change so that we figure out the net present value of your share of a defined benefit pension plan, and it can be transferred to another defined benefit pension plan. That's a simple, as a legal and economic and accounting matter, that is a very simple reform that would increase efficiency both in the labor market and in the capital market.
The only thing I'd add to that is there's a tension here, right? So if Teresa talked about retaining and keeping your best workers, so if you want to do that, you want to create incentives so that they can't take their benefits somewhere else. And plans have done that, states have done that, and they create these structures and barriers in the real world that restrict movement across state lines. So we can talk up here about how it would be ideal if they didn't have those things, but they do. And there's no incentive for them to take down those barriers because it costs money. They benefit when they can restrict how much teachers can move. They benefit when they can impose penalties on teachers moving across state
Chad,
lines.
that's not what economic theory says. Economic theory says that it cuts both ways. They want to attract talent from other places. A state has an equal interest in attracting that talent as it does in preventing the loss of that talent. So long as it's a universal system, economic theory doesn't support your point.
But the reality is every state has these penalties in place. They have them in
Yes, I
place
agree. I agree.
because they want to do it. And I'm not sure if they're smart in that, or they should have them, but in reality they do, mainly because of costs.
Teresa, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, there are states that are experimenting with limited, it's too limited, Chad, I agree, with portability. Look at, unions have done this with multiple employer plans, for janitors and other things. So there are ways to do it, and that's where leadership matters. But that doesn't mean moving teachers into a 401k system or a cash balance hybrid. So we have to improve the defined benefit system, but it is the best system here.
So I'm going to not make an assumption about all of your politics and assume you're Democrats. Maybe I might be off on
I'm a
one or two of
registered
you.
Republican.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't
If,
have thought that.
Okay, I'm not going to, okay, we'll
Me and
take
Teddy Roosevelt.
your party, we'll take your party affiliation out of this. But if you could advise a presidential candidate on what their platform should say about retirement security for all Americans, could you list a 3-point plan that you would provide to a presidential candidate of what they should be calling for. So David, you had the most vigorous nod on that, which is my determination of who answers first, so you
Yeah,
go.
well, I've written about this in my columns and other things. Number one, we need to increase Social Security benefits, an idea supported by 73%, 3 out of 4 Republicans in a number of polls. That's first and foremost. Increase Social Security benefits, particularly at the bottom. Two, restore the Reagan-era policy of taxing 90% of wages, or if that is uncomfortable because it is people earning between the low six figures up to about $1.5 million who are the most heavily squeezed by the tax system, then put a donut hole in and resume the tax at the level of $2 million or more, recognizing that the number of those jobs has been shrinking and the average pay in those jobs has been shrinking since the adoption of the Bush tax cuts, not the expected outcome. Two, go through and fundamentally reform and encourage more defined benefit pension plans so that they are in fact portable, inflation adjusted, and do the kinds of things Teresa and Chad and Dan and I have talked about. And then thirdly, and I think most important, give serious thought to replacing the entire welfare state with a guaranteed basic income, which would probably cost less than our current very complex, very unfair systems at the bottom.
Wow. Let's give that a hand. Let's give David a hand. All right, thank you, Chad.
Yeah, I'd put mine into two buckets. First is to use the lesson of the federal government. The federal government has a hybrid model for all their workers. As I mentioned before, they have Social Security for all their workers. They have a defined benefit, it's generally less generous than most teacher or other state government plans. And they have the thrift savings plans, the TSP, which is it's a 401k style plan, very low cost, very low fees. There have been plans and bills here in Washington to try to change that and to allow any worker to opt into the TSP plan because of its low fees, because of its attractive options. The second thing I would say is nudges. So there's so much power in defaults. So encouraging, the Obama administration has done some of this, but encouraging more about contribution rates, making sure that workers are at least set up to and nudged in a direction that they'll save enough for retirement, that they'll be nudged into things like life cycle funds. So there some guidance about how they can invest throughout their life cycle, and then things like annuities, things like making sure their retirements benefits and will last and provide them a secure retirement throughout their retirement years.
I have two buckets also. One is absolutely to expand Social Security, to shore it up, make sure it's solvent, do it with revenue increases, not with benefit cuts. Reject changes in COLAs, absolutely reject raising the retirement age because that's just a cut in benefits to the people who need it the most, and to eliminate or raise the earnings cap. Absolutely. That's first part of our platform, increase Social Security. The second one is to provide a universal pension system with a guaranteed return or a guaranteed payout. You can do that in a number of ways. Put people in TSP, but change the system while you're doing it, or create a guaranteed retirement system, a Social Security Plus, a place where people can put more money into the plan with the help of their employers and with a much more sensible tax break. This is something that I thought David was going to mention, but and he probably will. But we have to change the way that the government subsidizes retirement savings. Right now, we do it through a tax deduction, which is a tax deferral. So people now put money into their retirement accounts, deducting it from their income tax. You already know where I'm going. People with the highest rate, the highest income people, get the biggest subsidy from that. That grows over time. Famously, we know about Mitt Romney's IRA. He put a low-valued asset into his IRA. It blew up in value. Only a few people can do that. And he got the tax, and he didn't have to pay those earnings. Now, it's taxed when it's taken out, but that tax break is worth, oddly, about $140 billion per year, and that's a deduction. It's the most lopsided deduction expenditure we have in the code, the big one, it provides 80% of that benefit, 140 billion, goes to the top 20% of taxpayers. With one simple stroke of the pen, we change all those tax deductions into a refundable tax credit. If we spent no more money at all, that would automatically put about $600 in everyone's account. Half the people don't have anything. The other plus, and this is something that our research shop has done, is that trickles down to the state. Every state passively passes through the tax code, the tax rules of the federal government. So every state, without debate, without investigation, whether it's fair or efficient, also has this upside down tax deduction. In New York, it's worth $270 that goes to the top 10%. Most of it goes to the top 10% of taxpayers in New York. California, it's $301. We've calculated for all the 47 states with an income tax. So once you've actually changed the code from a tax deduction to refundable tax credit, you give $600 with no extra money to everybody, and then another couple of hundreds for people who live in states with income taxes. So I would expand Social Security and change the tax deduction into a refundable tax refund, and then allow everybody without a pension to be able to save in a not-for-profit, professionally managed pool like TSP or another kind of system that is developing in 20 states around the world, around the country.
Great. Okay,
So
Dan.
just to close the circle on Justice's question, for all of you who don't know, and Teresa's too modest to say this, one obscure politician named Hillary Clinton had her in recently to give just that advice. So feel heartened that that message was delivered to the presumptive frontrunner for the Democrat nomination. I would say, I'm a liberal Democrat. I'm a Elizabeth Warren Democrat. So her solution of expanding Social Security seems to me pretty simple, especially if we're talking about expanding a portable defined benefit plan. So, lifting the cap and paying for something in a country that can afford it, and getting out of a false choice debate where even among Democrats, some folks are pushing solutions called chain CPI, which is an obscure way of saying, let's cut Social Security when it's the most efficient, best vehicle for retirement savings that we have out there.
David, do you want to jump in on the text? Okay. So I have two state-related questions, and I'm going to do them both at the same time. Actually, one is a comment and one is a question, but if they come from Massachusetts and North Dakota, but I will expand this to allow you to describe if there's a particular state that you think is doing this well. So first, North Dakota. North Dakota Public Employees Retirement System has a portable DB pension plan that encourages savings. Employer contributes up to 4% to the 403B plan. Then the state makes its 4% contribution portable. The employer can then leave, the employee can then leave with its full 8% contribution. Okay, North Dakota?
We got it.
You got it,
Yeah,
okay.
we got it.
And I know who this question comes from, so if you may have to jump in here. And then the Massachusetts question. Public employees in Massachusetts do not have Social Security. State and local governments say it is too expensive to cover them. How can we deal with this argument? Massachusetts, are you still here? Is that the, okay, all right. So calling out North Dakota and Massachusetts, the Social Security question affects other states as well. So if you guys want to tackle those.
I mean, I can start. I think the question about North Dakota is important because it proves what we've been saying, which is this is about not throwing out a DB plan, but working with plan design. And we can figure out a plan design that gets past the legislature that gives folks who leave early an adequate and secure start to their retirement savings. On Massachusetts, I completely agree. Workers should be covered by Social Security in addition to a public plan. The fact that, what is it, Chad, over 1 million teachers don't have access to Social Security is something that should be corrected. One other state I'll point to, I think, Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, is Connecticut, where there's a bill now to move private sector workers and small businesses into a pooled, professionally managed capital that would be overseen by the retirement system. So that's, I think, for us, the model of what a good secure choice plan looks like.
I'd say a couple things. I'll take them separately. So North Dakota, they also have a defined benefit pension plan that about half of teachers don't qualify for because they don't stick around long enough, and only about 12% of teachers will stick around long enough to reach that peak at the normal retirement age. So they have part of a plan that they could expand up to make a more portable, strong retirement plan for everyone, but they also are operating this separate system that is costing the state a lot of money and isn't delivering benefits to all their workers. In Massachusetts on Social Security, I think it's a really important question. We have a report out that we called Uncovered about how we can think about and all the history and logistics for how to cover teachers under Social Security. The short answer is, there are FICA taxes which can add up. I think that the best way to do it would be to restructure the existing system, particularly for new workers over time. So say as of 2020, we'll cover new teachers under Social Security with a separate benefit plan that works with Social Security. So not just trying to take the current system and lop Social Security on top of it. That's going to be expensive and probably not going to provide the right mix of benefits. There are states that have considered putting all existing workers in. There's complications there. Maybe you could do things like opt-ins or letting people choose. So I think there are some creative solutions, but new workers would be the place to start.
I just want to go right at this idea that people from 0 to 5 years of tenure aren't getting anything from the system. Chad, I know you're younger, and that may seem unfair, but it makes a lot of sense for a pension system not to throw money after bad. If these workers are going to leave and it's not a good fit for them to be a teacher, then it doesn't make sense to put your pension dollar there. However, it does make sense for a nation to let those workers save somewhere for their retirement or to save. So there's a lot of other policies to encourage savings to people who are shopping for their jobs. But using your pension dollar in a system to do that makes no sense. So your report has this nice column of people who between 0 and 1 don't collect, but that means the system is working. I find that that not paying money to people who are shopping for jobs actually to be a good thing.
Okay, anybody else want to make a comment on any state? So the last thing I'm going to ask you is, what are you working on next? If you would be willing to, you're writers, you're thinkers, you were involved in organizations, tell us what you're planning for your next, what are you going to share with us what you're working on? David, you want to go?
Well, my major project at the moment, which I'm deep into and I've already delivered one big lecture about, is I am drafting a new Internal Revenue Code. And it is a system, I've already put out the part that deals with these issues, in which I would create something called a lifetime investment account that would be much more simple and universal. But fundamentally, the official U.S. government printout of our tax code is 6,400 plus pages. And the vast majority of it is simply there to enable people to receive the benefits of their economic gains without being taxed. And our tax system extracts the pain of a $2.5 trillion system when it only collects half that much money. And so I'm drafting a code that I anticipate will be less than 500 pages long and will promote work, savings, investment, families, children, and education, and will stop this massive, massive redistribution upwards on which the government publishes no statistics, but through a lot of 20 years of hard work, I've been able to thoroughly document in 3 books showing how it operates. And so that's, by the way, that's what I do on the side in addition to my writing columns and teaching at the law and the Graduate Business School and writing for Newsweek.
Okay.
My projects aren't quite as ambitious, but I'll try to explain them. So we have 2 briefs that we're working on, looking at different slices of the workforce. One looking at this short-term issue that Teresa mentioned. So the short-term workers are getting the biggest penalties. They're not being eligible for employer contributions or a pension, and it's a huge slice of the workforce, about half of teachers, which is just a large group of people given the size of the workforce. But to Teresa's point, that's not the only slice that's affected by the workforce. So we have another brief looking at what we call break-even points. So the point in time when teachers are actually eligible for a pension that's worth more than their own contributions plus interest. And as I said, in the median state, it's actually 24 years, according to Urban Institute. So that's even a smaller portion of the workforce that meets that point. And so trying to show that pension plans aren't meeting the needs for the large majority of workers. We're going to do some state work. I also mentioned a report that we're working on looking at the history and how pension plans have changed over time, how states have adjusted their formulas and what impacts they have on different teachers and depending on how long they stay in the profession.
Thanks for asking. We're working on two things. My team is working on the tax expenditure. This refundable tax credit is simple, and it's fair, and it's efficient. It's a good way to spend all of our tax dollars. And we're looking at how that impacts the state. So we're doing this kind of state variation. But my bigger project is to restore the idea that being a worker in the United States means that you can retire. So I'm really set apart from the rest of my profession, the economists, who are very comfortable. They love their jobs. For some of them, I wouldn't know if they were retired or not, because they stay a long time, mainly because they don't have a defined benefit system. TICREF is really flawed in this way, is that it really encourages people to stay on in the classroom, but usually they're in their offices. They're not really in their classroom, to stay on teaching. So they're churning out PhDs, and they're hiring postdocs, but they're not leaving so that their postdocs actually get a professorship position. So that's a real problem with the TICREF design. But I want all Americans to have retirement security. I think that we should provide retirement like we did in the past 40 years. And I'm finding in our research that the mortality gap between ordinary workers, not just racial minorities, but ordinary workers, and people at the top is actually really increasing. It's another form of equity and inequality that hasn't been appreciated, so that people with pensions are also living a lot longer, and they're able to acquire enough pensions, retire a little bit early, and enjoy about 18 years of a retirement life. But increasingly, people without pensions are having to look for work or work longer, and their retirement time is actually decreasing. So retirement time inequality is gotten much bigger, and I want to right that inequity. That's my big project.
So I'd also say two things. First, to address the private sector retirement crisis, the labor movement and some big firms that make money off of defined benefit plans right now, like KKR and the Carlyle Group and Blackstone, and Republican and Democratic state treasurers have started a group at Georgetown called the Center for Retirement Initiatives. So our hope is to expand the number of states that are looking at pooled and professionally managed plans from 20 to 40 or 50, eventually to build for a federal support and drive the debate in the presidential campaign, first. Second, in infrastructure, we've been encouraged by the success of the Clinton Initiative. I think what the challenge for us is improving the design of how pension plans invest, so we get both good jobs, good returns, and rebuild the country, but do it in a way that our international peers have led for a while. So in Canada and Australia, pension plans, instead of having Wall Street manage their money, oversee their own retirement dollars and invest their own retirement dollars. So in Canada, the pension plans there pay a much lower cost because Wall Street isn't skimming money out. So the Canadians' pension plan pays about 47 basis points for investing their infrastructure dollars instead of 2% off the top and 20% of any profit. So where we're focusing now as the infrastructure work ramps up is supporting a consortium of pension plans led by the California state teachers that are going to build their own model here, where they invest on their own behalf with other pension fund partners and do it in a way that creates good jobs, gets better returns because the investment costs are lower, and invests in both new and infrastructure that we need to rebuild right now.
Great, thank you. And all four of them will take volunteers if you want to sign up. Just see them. We're going to end a few minutes early so that you've got time to come up and talk individually with our panelists. I'd like to end by thanking all of you in the audience and those of you who were online with Twitter for your questions, and also to the panelists for your really thoughtful and thought-provoking presentations today, and the way that you participated with each other and joined with us in this conversation. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, guys.